The cold metal bars of the cage felt sharp against the alien girl's skin, as if they were biting into her very soul. Her shackles were heavy, cutting into her delicate wrists, and her body ached from days of confinement. She had no idea how long she had been here. Time felt irrelevant. The lights above flickered, casting shadows that seemed to dance mockingly around her. Her name. She couldn't even remember it anymore. The memories of who she once was before she was captured had faded away with each passing day of cruelty. The only thing that mattered now was survival. She had been sold to the highest bidder like an object, an item with no value beyond her ability to serve. She had heard whispers in the dark corners of the room. The humans, strangers in her world, had paid for slaves before, but the words, torture and punishment hung in the air like a thick fog. She was no exception. The alien girl knew what was coming. She had seen the way the other slaves were treated. Torture, humiliation, and pain were the only things she could expect. And yet, as the metal door to the auction room creaked open, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a chance, however small, that she might be taken away from this place, this hellish cage. Maybe she could escape the horrors of being another nameless slave, forgotten in the shadows. Footsteps echoed through the room, slow and deliberate. Her heart raced, each beat hammering in her chest as she tried to steady her breath. She didn't want to show fear, but how could she not? Fear was all she knew now. She saw him before he saw her, a middle-aged human man, tall with a serious expression, walked past the cages where the other slaves were kept. His dark eyes scanned the room, looking for something, or perhaps someone. The other prisoners shied away, their heads low, their bodies bent in submission. She didn't. Their gazes locked for a brief second, and for a moment she wondered if he had noticed her defiance. She quickly looked away, not wanting to draw attention. She had learned the hard way not to make eye contact. The buyers liked to see fear. They liked to see the submission, but she wouldn't give them that satisfaction. The man stopped in front of her cage, his gaze lingering for a moment longer than she expected. He didn't speak at first. Instead, he looked her up and down, taking in her appearance, her frail form, and the bruises that marred her alien skin. She tried to hide the pain, but it was impossible. How much, he finally asked, his voice deep and cold. It was a simple question, but it made her stomach twist with dread. She had no value other than this. She was a commodity, a thing to be, bought and sold. The auctioneer, a man with greasy hair and a crooked smile, stepped forward, his eyes glinting with greed. "This one's a bargain, sir. Hardly any damage. A few scars, but she'll make a good servant," he said, motioning to the girl with a wave of his hand. His tone was dismissive, as if she were nothing more than a piece of meat. The man didn't speak. He just stared at her, his eyes softening, something unreadable in his expression. She couldn't understand it. He didn't look at her the way the other buyers did, with a mixture of disgust and lust. His gaze was different, more curious, almost as if he were looking at something precious, something worth saving. Her breath caught in her throat, her chest tightening. No. She couldn't let herself hope. She couldn't trust this man, this stranger. Every human who had bought her kind had only brought suffering. She wouldn't be fooled again. The auctioneer's voice broke through her thoughts. 5,000 credits, sir. For this one, that's a steal. Don't let her looks fool you, she's a fighter." The man didn't respond right away. Instead, he stood there for a long moment, his eyes locked on the girl. She felt exposed under his gaze, like he could see every part of her. Her pain, her fears, her shattered dreams. It was too much. She looked down, unable to bear the weight of it. "Sold," the man finally said, his voice as cold as the cage she was trapped in. The words hit her like a slap. She was sold. Sold to him. But for what? She felt sick, her body trembling, as she was pulled from her cage by the guards. They were rough with her, yanking her out of the confined space with no care for her wounds. Her legs buckled beneath her, but the guards kept pushing her forward, dragging her across the room. She didn't dare look at him. She couldn't. If she looked, if she showed any sign of weakness, he would take it as a sign of submission. So, she kept her head down, her gaze fixed on the cold, hard floor. But as she was led out of the auction room and into the harsh daylight, she couldn't help but glance up at him one last time. The man was standing there watching her, and for the briefest moment their eyes met again. There was something in his expression now, something different. Was it pity? Or maybe, was it something else? She didn't know, but she couldn't trust it. No matter how kind his eyes looked, she had been betrayed too many times before to believe in false hope. She would survive. She had to. The girl was led outside into the bright, blinding sunlight. The harsh rays stung her skin, making her wince. She squinted, trying to adjust to the sudden brightness after being trapped in the dark, cold cage for so long. Her heart pounded in her chest, a constant reminder of the fear that gripped her. She had been sold, and now, she was walking into the unknown with a man she barely knew. She had no idea what he planned to do with her, but all she could think of was that it would be something terrible. The guards shoved her forward, their hands rough as they shoved her into the back of a transport vehicle. The air smelled of dust and exhaust, thick with the scent of the city's pollution. The vehicle's door slammed shut behind her, and she was left in a small, cramped space, her hands still shackled. She was too tired to fight anymore. The exhaustion from her days in the cage, combined with the emotional toll, left her barely able to keep her eyes open. But then she felt the vehicle lurch forward, and the man who had bought her stepped inside. He didn't speak. He just stood there, his presence looming over her like a dark cloud. She could feel his eyes on her, but she refused to meet his gaze. She couldn't. Not yet. Her heart raced even faster at the thought of what would happen next. He sat across from her, and for a moment there was silence. It wasn't the silence of a cold, distant space. It wasn't oppressive or threatening. It was almost calming. Still, she couldn't bring herself to relax. The fear was too deep, too ingrained in her mind to allow any sense of comfort. The man cleared his throat. "Are you hungry?" His voice was unexpectedly soft, not harsh like she had imagined, but gentle, almost kind. She didn't answer. Her stomach growled from the emptiness inside her, but she wasn't about to show him that weakness. She had learned long ago that showing any kind of need was a mistake. She didn't care if she was starving, it didn't matter. She didn't trust him. For a moment, he seemed to think she hadn't heard him, but then he spoke again. "I'll take that as a yes." He pulled something out of a small bag he had with him and placed it on the floor between them. It was food, simple, but enough to satisfy her aching stomach. A small packet of dried meat and a piece of fruit, sweet-smelling and fresh. Her mouth watered, and despite her fear, she couldn't help but stare at it. "Go ahead," he said softly, his voice no longer commanding but gentle, urging her to eat. Her eyes flicked between the food and his face. His expression wasn't threatening. There was no malice in his eyes, just patience, maybe even a hint of concern. It confused her. He was the one who had bought her, the one who now owned her. She had expected nothing but cruelty, yet here he was, offering her food as if she were a guest. Still, she hesitated. The fear that gripped her was too strong to let go of, even in the face of something as simple as food. But the gnawing hunger inside her couldn't be ignored forever. Slowly, she reached for the packet, her hands trembling. She unwrapped it cautiously as though the food might turn into something else, something dangerous. The man didn't move as she ate, didn't say a word. His gaze remained on her, but it wasn't the kind of stare that made her feel like prey. Instead, it was something different. She couldn't quite place it, but there was no fear in it, no judgment, just a quiet understanding. Her hands shook as she brought the food to her mouth, the first bite tasting sweeter than anything she'd had in weeks. She didn't want to admit it, but it felt good. It felt comforting. She ate quickly, her hunger taking over, but still her eyes remained on him, watching for any sign of betrayal, any hint that this kindness was just part of a cruel game. When she finished, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, looking up at him. Why? She asked before she could stop herself. The word came out before she could think of what she was really asking. Why had he bought her? Why was he being so kind? What did he want from her? His eyes softened at her question, and he leaned forward slightly as if to offer reassurance. I didn't buy you to hurt you, he said quietly. I bought you because you deserve better than this. His voice was steady, but there was something in it, something she couldn't quite grasp. Was it sincerity? Compassion? She couldn't be sure. Her throat tightened at his words, and she swallowed hard. She wanted to believe him, but it was impossible. She had been hurt too many times to trust in kind words. She had been used, beaten, and sold too many times to believe that this man, this human, was any different. You'll see, he continued, as if reading her thoughts. I'm not like the others. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to give you something different. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the air between them. Freedom. Her heart skipped a beat at the word, the very word she had stopped believing in. Freedom. It sounded foreign to her now. She had no idea what it meant anymore. It was a dream she had buried deep inside her, a dream that seemed impossible. Yet, for a brief moment, the thought lingered. What, if he was telling the truth? The vehicle slowed, and she could see that they were no longer in the city. The buildings gave way to wide, open fields, the landscape stretching out into the distance. They were leaving the crowd, the noise, and the danger of the auction behind. But she still couldn't shake the feeling of unease. As the vehicle pulled to a stop, the man stood and turned to her. We're here, he said, his voice still soft. And you're free to stay as long as you want. She didn't respond, her mind swirling with questions, her heart torn between fear and hope. Was this real? Could she trust him? Could she let herself believe that something good was possible? He turned to open the door, and she was left alone with her thoughts, the weight of the decision ahead of her heavy in her chest. The ride seemed endless, the world outside the vehicle slowly changing from the noise and dust of the city to the quiet emptiness of wide-open spaces. The alien girl sat still, her mind racing with thoughts she didn't know how to process. The man, the one who had bought her, had been kind, too kind. She had never known such kindness, not since she was a child before everything changed. The thought of freedom, of a life without pain, kept echoing in her mind like a distant dream. But dreams had a way of shattering, didn't they? She couldn't allow herself to believe in something so impossible. She had been sold as a slave, used and abused. There was no escaping that reality. She would never be free. The vehicle rumbled to a stop, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced outside, unsure of what to expect. The wide fields of green stretched out before her, the blue sky above looking like something from a dream. There were no buildings, no people. Only the sound of the wind and the rustling of the trees. The land felt empty, but peaceful. Too peaceful. Welcome to my home, the man said as he stepped out of the vehicle and reached his hand back to her. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should take his hand, but there was something in his gaze, something that spoke of sincerity, that made her trust him, even if only a little. Slowly, she reached forward and placed her hand in his. His grip was firm but gentle, and he helped her out of the vehicle with ease. She looked around. The home was a small cabin, nestled at the edge of the forest with vines creeping up the sides and the smell of fresh earth in the air. It wasn't much, but it felt different from the cold, sterile places she had been. There were no walls of metal, no cold floors. This was a place that felt alive. Come on in, he said, smiling slightly as he motioned toward the door. I'm sure you're tired. There's food inside and a place for you to rest. Her stomach growled at the mention of food, but she didn't trust herself to speak. She just nodded and followed him inside. The door creaked open, revealing a simple but cozy interior. A fire crackled in the hearth, its warmth filling the room with an inviting glow. The air smelled of wood, herbs, and something faintly sweet. It was the smell of comfort, something she hadn't experienced in years. The man set down his bag by the door and turned to face her. "I'll go prepare something for you to eat," he said. "You're free to explore the cabin while I do." She wanted to protest, wanted to refuse his offer of food, but her body, weak from days of hunger, betrayed her. She nodded silently, unsure of what else to say. She didn't know how to act in a place like this. It was too foreign, too kind. She walked slowly around the cabin, her eyes scanning the room. It was simple but warm. A small wooden table stood, in the center, surrounded by mismatched chairs. The floor was wooden, creaking slightly under her feet. There were shelves filled with books, a few potted plants near the windows, and a small kitchen area tucked in the corner. Everything seemed so normal, so different from the cold, harsh environment she had known her whole life. As she walked toward the window, her reflection caught her eye. She had never seen herself like this before, dirty, bruised, her clothes torn and ragged. She was a far cry from the young girl she used to be, before her world had been ripped apart. She had always been taught to hide her emotions, to mask her pain, but in this quiet place there was no need to pretend. The weight of everything she had endured crashed down on her in an instant. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. She couldn't cry, not now. She had to stay strong, had to remember who she was. But a soft voice broke through her thoughts. "I'm sorry if I've made you uncomfortable," the man said from behind her. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, holding a tray of food in his hands. He looked at her with genuine concern, his eyes softening as he took in her weary expression. "I didn't mean to bring up bad memories. I just want you to feel safe here." Safe. The word hit her like a punch to the gut. She had never felt safe. Not in the cages, not in the auction house, not even in her own skin. Safety was a luxury she had never been afforded. The idea of it, of being in a place where she didn't have to fear for her life, seemed impossible. But somehow she couldn't push the thought away. What if it were real? What if this man truly meant it? He set the tray down on the table and pulled out a chair for her. "Please sit. You don't have to worry about anything here." The sincerity in his voice made her heart flutter, but she quickly pushed the feeling aside. She had learned long ago not to trust anyone, especially not humans. They were the ones who sold her, used her, and tossed her aside like she didn't matter. But this man, he was different. She could feel it, even if she didn't want to admit it. She slowly sat down at the table, her hands still trembling. He placed the food in front of her, a simple meal of bread, fruit, and some kind of stew that smelled delicious. She hesitated, eyeing it warily. It was the first real food she had had in days, and yet, it felt like a trap. Was this kindness just a mask for something more sinister? She couldn't be sure. The man noticed her hesitation and smiled gently. "You don't have to eat if you don't want to, but you should at least try. It's homemade, and it'll help. You feel better." Her stomach growled again, louder this time, betraying her. She couldn't ignore it any longer. Slowly, she picked up the spoon and tasted the stew. Her eyes widened as the warmth and flavor hit her. It was nothing like the bland, tasteless meals she had been fed in the auction house. This was good. It was comforting, like something she hadn't known she missed. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a flicker of hope. Could this really be happening? Could she truly be free? She took another bite, and for a brief moment she let herself believe it. Maybe, just maybe, this could be her new life. The days blurred together in a haze of uncertainty. The alien girl, now living in the small cabin on the outskirts of a vast, quiet forest, found herself wrestling with a constant, gnawing question. Was she safe here? The man, her new master, or so she thought, had been nothing but kind, but she still couldn't shake the fear that this was all a setup, a lie waiting to unfold. Every day was a new struggle, not just to survive, but to believe. She spent most of her time by the window, staring out at the unfamiliar world beyond. The sun, bright and warm, had replaced the cold, sterile lights of the auction house. The sounds of birds and wind replaced the distant hum of machinery. but the peace that surrounded her felt strange. She had been trained to fear peace. It made her feel vulnerable. There were no walls here, no guards, no chains to remind her that she was trapped. The absence of fear was the hardest part of all. Her mind was constantly on edge. She couldn't let her guard down. Her instincts told her that kindness was a weakness, a trick to lure her into a false sense of security. She couldn't afford to be tricked again. Every time the man entered the room, she tensed, her body ready to flee at any sign of danger. But he never acted the way the others had. He didn't shout at her, didn't treat her like property. He was always calm, patient, asking if she was comfortable, offering food or a kind word. He even tried to teach her about the world outside the cabin, about the stars, the forest, the seasons that changed here. His stories, his voice, felt real. Too real. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a deep purple, the man sat down beside her at the table, a plate of food in his hands. He had brought it from the kitchen, just like every other night. She had never refused his meals, though every time she couldn't help but wonder if there was something he was hiding in that food, some cruel twist she had missed. But each bite, each sip, tasted fresh and nourishing. It made her feel weak, as if her defenses were being worn down with every meal, every smile. "You've been here for over a week now," he said, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost thoughtful. "I hope you're beginning to trust me." The words hit her like a cold wind. Trust. Could she trust him? Could she allow herself to believe that she was free, that she wasn't just waiting for the next betrayal to come? She didn't answer at first. Instead, she stared into the fire burning in the hearth, watching the flames dance. It was so easy to just give in, to stop fighting, to rest in this warmth. But what would it cost her? What if it was all a game, a trap meant to break her spirit before he finally took what he wanted? "I'm not like the others," he said, his voice almost a whisper now. "I know you've been through a lot, and I understand why you don't trust me. But you don't have to be afraid here. You're safe." Safe. She wanted to believe him so badly, but the word felt foreign on her tongue. Her entire life had been filled with fear. Fear of the auction, fear of the guards, fear of the people who had used her. Safe? What did that even mean anymore? "I don't want anything from you," he continued. "I don't want to hurt you. I just want you to have a chance at a real life, a chance to heal." Healing. The thought was almost laughable. How could she heal from everything she had been through? The scars on her body and soul were too deep, too raw. Could a few days in this cabin really undo years of suffering? She couldn't imagine it. "I've been alone here for a long time," the man said, his tone softer now, as if he was sharing something personal, something vulnerable. "I know what it's like to feel lost, to feel like you have no one to turn to. But now I have you here. I don't want to let you go. Not until you're ready." His words pierced her chest. There was something in them, something that made her want to believe. He wasn't like the others. He didn't have the same hunger in his eyes. But could she really trust him? Could she let herself believe in this new life he was offering her? The tension in her chest tightened as her mind raced. She couldn't let go of her fear. She couldn't trust him. No matter how kind he seemed, he was still human, and humans had always been the ones to hurt her. "I'm not ready," she finally said, her voice shaky. She didn't look at him, afraid he would see the vulnerability she was trying so desperately to hide. "I don't know if I'll ever be ready." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he sat back, his expression unreadable. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, but she couldn't bring herself to meet it. She wasn't ready to face him. She wasn't ready to face the truth of what this place, this kindness, could mean. For the rest of the evening, there was a heavy silence between them. The fire crackled, its warmth surrounding them, but the tension in the room made it feel colder than ever. She wanted to apologize, to tell him she didn't mean to push him away. But the words wouldn't come. The fear inside her was too strong. Finally, as the night wore on and the stars began to fill the sky outside, The man stood and began to walk toward the door. "I'll give you space," he said quietly. "You don't have to decide right now. Take your time." She nodded but didn't look up. He was giving her space just as he had promised, but she could feel the distance between them grow wider with every passing moment. The walls she had built around herself were crumbling, and she didn't know if she could stop them from falling. As he left the room, she sat in the silence, her mind spinning with doubt. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was just too scared to see the truth. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop wondering, what if this was all just another trap? What if she was being tricked into trusting him only to be betrayed once again? The fire flickered, casting shadows on the walls, and she closed her eyes, letting the heat wash over her. There was no escaping the fear that had been ingrained in her for so long, but for the first time, she allowed herself to wonder if she could learn to trust again. The days passed in a quiet rhythm, each one blending into the next like the gentle flow of a river. The alien girl found herself drawn to the small things, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees, the way the fire crackled and popped in the hearth, the warmth of the sun against her skin when she stepped outside. For the first time, in a long while, she felt something other than fear, a fragile sense of peace. But the fear was still there, lurking in the corners of her mind, never too far away. She had spent the morning gathering wild herbs from the forest with the man. He had shown her how to identify the plants, teaching her their names and their uses. The world outside this cabin, once so alien and strange, was slowly becoming familiar. She had never known a life like this, so simple, so quiet. It was as if the chaos of her past had never existed, and in its place was something entirely new. When they returned to the cabin, the man had gone to prepare lunch, and the girl found herself standing at the window, staring out at the wide expanse of land. Her mind was far away, lost in thoughts of what she had left behind. She could still hear the echoes of the auction, the cruel voices of the buyers, the fear that had nearly consumed her. But here, in this place, it felt like those memories were fading, slipping through her fingers like water. She felt a shift inside her, something she couldn't quite explain. It was as though the walls she had built around her heart were starting to crumble piece by piece. She had been terrified to trust, to believe in something better. But every day, the man's kindness had chipped away at her defenses. She had never known someone could be so gentle, so patient. And each time he spoke to her, each time he offered her something as simple as a meal or a smile, she felt something stir within her, a spark of hope. But she couldn't let herself get too close. She couldn't risk it. Her thoughts were interrupted when the man entered the room carrying 2 steaming bowls of soup. The aroma filled the air, rich with the scent of vegetables and herbs. He set the bowls down on the table in front of her and sat across from her, his eyes soft, his gaze warm. "You've been quiet today," he said, his voice low but gentle. "Is something on your mind?" She looked down at the soup, her fingers trembling slightly as she picked up her spoon. She didn't want to admit it, but she couldn't deny the emotions that were swirling inside her. "I don't know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I think I'm starting to believe that I could have a different life, a better life." Her words hung in the air, and she immediately regretted speaking them. She didn't want to get her hopes up. She didn't want to be disappointed again. But the truth was, something had changed inside her. The idea of freedom, of living without fear, was starting to feel real. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine it. A future where she wasn't trapped in chains, where she wasn't seen as an object, as less than human. The man didn't respond right away. He simply watched her, his gaze steady as if he could see right through the walls she had built. She couldn't look at him. The vulnerability she felt was overwhelming. Finally, he spoke. "I'm glad you're starting to see that," he said softly. "I told you before, you don't have to be afraid here. I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you." She glanced up at him then, her heart thudding in her chest. His words, so simple, so sincere, struck a chord deep within her. The walls around her heart trembled, threatening to crumble for good. She had never felt this way before, never known the warmth of someone's care, someone's love. Her thoughts were interrupted as the man reached across the table, his hand resting gently on hers. It wasn't forceful, but it wasn't hesitant, either. It was an offering. A promise. Her breath caught in her throat. The touch, so simple and yet so profound, sent a wave of warmth through her body. She hadn't been touched like this in so long, no longer as a slave, no longer as someone who was used for others' pleasure. This touch was different. It was kind. It was real. For a moment, they just sat there in silence, their hands touching, the weight of unspoken words between them. She could feel the tension in the air, the electricity, the unspoken connection that had been building between them. She wanted to pull away, to retreat into the safety of her fears, but something held her in place. Something in his gaze. Something in the way his hand rested on hers made her want to stay. Finally, he spoke again, his voice soft, almost hesitant. "You don't have to be afraid of me. I won't hurt you, I promise." The promise in his words was enough to break the last of the walls around her heart. For the first time, she let herself believe him. She didn't know why, but she did. There was something about him, something genuine and warm that made her trust him. "I'm not used to this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know how to accept it." The man gave her a small, understanding smile. "You don't have to accept everything all at once. You don't have to be ready. We can take it slow. But I want you to know this. You don't have to be alone anymore." Her chest tightened at his words. She wanted to say something in return, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she squeezed his hand just a little, as if to thank him for showing her that kindness wasn't a weakness, that it was something worth holding on to. They ate in silence, the air between them no longer heavy with doubt, but filled with something else. Hope. Possibility. It was a strange feeling, one she wasn't used to, but she welcomed it, even if only for a moment. When the meal was finished, the man stood and walked over to the fire, adding a few more logs to keep the warmth alive. She stayed at the table, her thoughts swirling, her heart still racing from the touch of his hand. This was more than she had ever hoped for, and yet she was still afraid. Afraid of the future, afraid of what would happen if she let go of her fear. But deep down, a part of her knew that this was the beginning of something new, something good, something that might just change everything. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe it. The days had begun to stretch longer, and yet the alien girl felt as though time itself had slowed to a crawl. The peaceful cabin, nestled at the edge of the forest, had become a strange sanctuary, one she still didn't fully understand. Every morning she would wake to the soft chirping of birds, the light filtering through the trees, and the smell of fresh herbs cooking in the small kitchen. She had grown used to this calm routine, too used to it. But deep inside, she still carried the weight of fear that this was all an illusion, that the kindness she had been shown was temporary, like a dream fading at the first light of day. She wasn't used to peace. She wasn't used to safety. She had been too long in the dark, too long in chains to believe that something this simple could be real. Every time she caught herself enjoying a meal or a quiet moment with the man, she found herself wondering if this was the calm before the storm. She had been trying in small ways to open up. She had even shared a laugh with the man a few days ago when he told a silly story about his childhood. It had felt strange, but it had also felt good. But no matter how hard she tried, a part of her always pulled back. It wasn't just the fear of being betrayed again. It was the fear of loving something, of caring about someone and having it all ripped away. It was late afternoon when the tension she had been carrying for so long finally snapped. The man had gone into town to get supplies, something he did often, leaving her alone in the cabin. She tried to pass the time with small chores, washing dishes, tidying up, but her mind was elsewhere. The silence of the cabin felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in on her. Then out of nowhere the door slammed open. She jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the fading light. It was him, the man who had given her everything, who had promised her safety. But something was different. His face was grim, his expression hard. He stepped inside quickly, shutting the door behind him with an unusual force. "What's wrong?" she asked, standing up from her place at the table. Her instinct screamed at her to be cautious, but she couldn't suppress the feeling that something was terribly off. The man didn't immediately respond. He looked around the cabin as if making sure everything was in place, his jaw clenched tight. She had never seen him like this before. His eyes, usually calm and gentle, were now dark with concern, or perhaps something deeper, something more urgent. "They know where I live," he said, his voice low, almost to himself. "Who?" Her heart began to race. The fear that she had tried to suppress began to surge forward. "What do you mean?" He turned to face her, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity she had never seen before. "The people who bought you. They know that I have you. And they're coming." The words hit her like a cold wave. The people who had used her, tortured her, sold her, they were coming. After everything, after all the promises, after the weeks of peace, the world she had tried to escape was coming back to drag her back into the nightmare. Her breath caught in her throat, and she took an instinctive step back. "No," she whispered. "No, this isn't happening." He moved toward her quickly, his expression softening. "I'll protect you, I won't let them take you, you have my word." But the words felt empty, hollow, as if they couldn't fill the space of the terror that was spreading inside her chest. She had heard promises before. They meant nothing. Not when it came to survival. Not when it came to the cruel reality of the world she had come from. "You don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "They're not just going to take me, they'll kill you too, they won't let you go." The man reached out, his hand brushing against hers. "I'm not afraid of them, and I'm not going to let them hurt you." Her mind spun. She couldn't let him face them. She couldn't let him risk everything for her. The fear that had haunted her for years, the fear of being betrayed, the fear of being trapped, had all come rushing back. This place, this small piece of peace she had found, was slipping away faster than she could grasp it. She pulled her hand back from his, her eyes wide with panic. "You don't know what they're capable of. You think you can protect me, but you can't." The man's face softened and he stepped closer. "I don't care what they've done to you. I won't let them do it again. I won't let you go back to that life." She shook her head, her chest tightening as tears welled up in her eyes. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that this man, this human, was different, that he could truly protect her from the horrors of her past. But she couldn't let herself. She couldn't risk him getting hurt. She couldn't risk him dying for something she had no right to ask for. "You don't understand," she said again, her voice breaking. "You can't save me." The man reached for her again, his touch gentle but firm. "Yes, I can, and I will." The words were so simple, so straightforward, but they broke through the walls she had built around her heart. For the first time, she felt the weight of what he was offering, the real weight of his promise. He wasn't just talking about protection or survival, he was talking about something deeper, something stronger. She looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of doubt, any hint that this was just another cruel trick. But there was none. All she saw was determination. And for the first time, she felt it, the flicker of hope she had been hiding from for so long. "I trust you," she whispered, the words leaving her lips before she could stop them. His face softened, and he took a deep breath, pulling her into a gentle embrace. "I won't let anything happen to you. I promise." And in that moment, with her heart pounding and the weight of the world pressing down on them both, she realized something. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for something more. A chance at a life, a future. And, for the first time in years, she wasn't alone. The fear was still there, but so was the hope. And for the first time, it felt like enough. The night had fallen and the cabin was quiet. save for the crackling of the fire in the hearth. The alien girl sat at the table, her hands folded in front of her, eyes lost in thought. The man had gone outside for a moment, but she didn't feel his absence the way she usually did. A strange calm had settled over her, a calm she hadn't known in years. Earlier that day they had spoken of plans to leave this place and head to the town. She had been nervous at first, not knowing what the future would bring. But when the man had held her gaze and told her, "We'll go together," something in her chest had loosened. It was the first time she realized that she had a choice. She wasn't just waiting for something to happen to her. She could take action. She could choose. Her fingers nervously traced the edge of the table, remembering the promise he had made. He would keep her safe. He had said it time and time again, and each time the words had sunk deeper into her heart. Could she trust him? Could she really believe in the possibility of a future? She glanced out the window, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the dark sky. The wind rustled the leaves of the trees outside, a soft, calming sound. The forest, the cabin, this life. It all felt so different from the chaos and pain she had known before. So different yet so fragile, like glass. She feared it would shatter the moment she allowed herself to believe in it fully. The door creaked open, and the man stepped inside, his footsteps light but purposeful. He closed the door behind him and stood for a moment, taking in the scene. She was sitting at the table, her hands resting quietly in front of her. Her eyes met his, and for a brief moment, neither of them spoke. There was no need for words, not in that moment. His eyes softened as he approached her, his gaze searching hers as though he could see into the depths of her soul. "Are you ready?" he asked gently, the question hanging between them, suspended in the air like a fragile promise. She didn't respond immediately. Her heart beat wildly in her chest, her mind racing. Ready for what? To leave? To walk into the unknown? She had spent her entire life running from fear, running from the pain that always seemed to follow her. But now, with him by her side, the fear didn't feel as overwhelming. It felt like something she could face, together. Slowly, she nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "I'm ready." He smiled at her, and for the first time she saw something in his expression that she hadn't seen before. Hope. It wasn't just hope for her freedom. It was hope for both of them. She wasn't just a burden to him. She wasn't just someone he was rescuing. They were in this together, and that made all the difference. He sat down across from her, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm glad. We'll leave at first light. You don't have to worry. You don't have to look back anymore." The words felt heavy with meaning, as if he were giving her permission to let go of her past, to step forward into a future she had never dared to imagine, a future that was hers to shape. As he reached across the table to take her hand, she felt a rush of warmth flood through her. She had been so afraid for so long, so afraid to trust, to believe in anything, but now, as she held his hand in hers, something inside her shifted. She realized that she didn't need to know all the answers. She didn't need to have everything figured out. All she needed to do was take the next step, and for the first time in her life she was ready to take it. For years she had been a prisoner, of the auction house, of the cruel people who had used her, of her own fear. But now, sitting in the warmth of the cabin, with the man beside her, she understood something she had never allowed herself to believe. She was free. The man gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, his eyes filled with understanding. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. We're in this together. You'll never be alone again." His words settled deep inside her, and she felt the final piece of her heart unlock. She wasn't alone. She wasn't a slave, and she wasn't just someone's possession. She was a person with a future she could choose. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at him, the weight of everything she had endured, crashing down on her all at once. She had never known love, never known kindness. But now, in this small cabin in the woods, with the man who had saved her. She felt it. For the first time, she knew what it felt like to be loved. "I don't know what's ahead," she whispered, her voice shaky but filled with a newfound strength. "But I know that I'm not afraid anymore. Not as long as I'm with you." He smiled at her, the warmth of it reaching all the way to her soul. "Then let's take this step together. The rest doesn't matter right now. What matters is that we're here, and we'll figure the rest out as we go." With those words, she finally let go of her fear. She let go of the past, of the pain, of the memories that had haunted her for so long. She no longer needed them to define her. What mattered now was the future, her future. And with him by her side, it was a future full of possibility. The man stood and held out his hand to her, his smile never faltering. "Shall we?" She stood, taking his hand in hers, and for the first time she didn't feel like a victim. She didn't feel like someone who had been broken by the world. She felt whole. She felt ready. Together they walked toward the door, toward the unknown. But for the first time, it didn't feel like a place of fear. It felt like a place of hope. And as the door closed behind them, she knew that this was just the beginning. A new beginning. Her new beginning. And this time, she wasn't going to let anything stop her from living it.